Hello, I'd like to say thank you very much, Tim, for inviting me. I thought that it was going to be quite a difficult thing to actually come to be a speaker tonight, but it's good to know that the bar was set really, really low. And I think I'm going to prove, because I think one of the things that Freud likes to do is to prove he's always right. I think that I will be able to prove Tim right, that he really has set the bar really, really low. And I think we'll see how we get on with that. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the interpretation of dreams. The interpretation of dreams, the book. Okay? So obviously there will be something about dreams themselves, but my focus is going to be on this book. Okay? Sigmund Freud wrote the interpretation of dreams between 1895 and 1899. It was published finally on the 4th of November in that year. At that particular time, Freud's reputation was not a great one. He had the thing for which he was best known, and you might say there's a Hastings link here, he had introduced cocaine into the West. So that is a kind of link with that. Something of which he was extremely proud at the time, but later came to be somewhat ashamed of, and he did try to repress a great deal of public knowledge about that. But he'd also written a book in 1897 in which he'd put forward the then totally revolutionary theory that the origin of neurosis in women was often that they had been genuinely sexually abused. And that was obviously regarded as an appalling thing to say in Viennese society at that time. And the book met an icy reception. So when writing the interpretation of dreams, he was hoping to somewhat restore his reputation. The book only had 600 copies printed and took 8 years for those copies to sell. And so it did not immediately transform things. By 1902, he was extremely depressed. But obviously, the book caught on, the ideas became widely accepted, and came to have an influence on other fields such as the study of literature and so on. I'm going to accompany my talk by some pictures. Now, these pictures are paintings by Picasso and Dali. And the reason why I've chosen those, because these two painters have a link with the Freudian world. There are many Freudian interpretations of Picasso, and there are also some connections between Picasso and Freud, in that Picasso wasn't called Pablo Picasso originally, he changed his name. Freud changed his name from Sigismund to Sigmund. And he did that, he said quite candidly, as an act of fratricide, as a way of killing his father. And Picasso said something similar about his change of name. And in an article which Freud wrote about Picasso, he said that in fact Picasso had also been trying to kill his father through the name change. And what is notable about Picasso's paintings is that he was interested in the underbelly of society. He was interested in thieves, prostitutes, people who were not seen as respectable, if you like. And he was trying to paint, if you like, the ugly side, the unconscious. So that's the link with Picasso. And then we come on to some paintings by Dali, who was overtly a Freudian. He set out to actually represent Freudian symbols in his paintings. And I just invite you, there's no direct connection between what I'm saying and the paintings I will bring up. Just to what extent can you see some sense of the unconscious as a site of desires which we are ashamed of, our aggression, our hostility, our jealousy? To what extent can you see these things in the faces of Picasso's subjects? And when it comes to Dali, I wonder what sexual symbolism you can find in those. Okay? All right. Now, Freud was extremely proud of what he'd achieved in the interpretation of dreams. He felt he had unlocked a secret that the human race had struggled with for centuries. He thought he'd done something of tremendous importance. What was this discovery? Well, he thought that the function of a dream was to express the fulfillment of a wish. Now, not just any wish, a repressed wish, okay? And not only a straightforward fulfillment, but a disguised fulfillment. And the dream does this in the following way. First, there are the dream thoughts, the things that are, if you like, what lies behind the dream, like, for example, the ingredients of the cake. Then you've got the manifest dream, which is the dream that you dreamt. And that is the dream where the actual content, that the original content is often disguised by a number of mechanisms. Now, I'm going to try to illustrate this with a dream that I personally had the Sunday before coming here. Now, in my dream, I dreamt that I was travelling up to Cambridge, where I was going to be a university lecturer. I'm only 25 in this dream, by the way. There's a piece of wish fulfillment just to start off with. Now, I share the journey with an 18-year-old woman who's going up to Cambridge to be a student at the university. And we have a phenomenally boring conversation. A conversation which is tricky and sticky and stilted. And now, in the next part of the dream, I told you this is wish fulfillment. Okay, ready? She has her arm around me. Okay. She has her arm around me, and I say to her, no, she says to me, you were really boring on the train. And I say to her, well, you were really boring as well. Instead of hitting me, which might be quite natural, she says instead, you're right, you know. We were both boring because we were nervous. And when people are nervous, they are boring. And I then woke up. Now, on the day before dreaming this, I was preparing this talk. So you can see some connections right away. I think of you as Cambridge University students, a demanding audience who are going to view me critically and are going to demand that my lecture be of a reasonably high standard. So that's the first thing, okay? The first thing that's clear, that's what's going on. It's also clear that I'm afraid of being boring, okay? And I want to find an excuse for being boring. I'm boring because I'm nervous. That's why I'm boring, okay? If I wasn't nervous, I wouldn't be boring. And of course, you can see in this dream some other things going on, because I have an excuse for being boring. The wish that's being fulfilled is that you will make allowances for my being boring. And of course, like people who give talks in general, like politicians or anybody like that, a speaker has a desire to be loved. And so at the end of the dream, So that's an example then of the sort of Freudian wish fulfillment in action. It's disguised, because it's not the Bavard bar, it's Cambridge University. It's the day of the dream day is when the material gets generated. And by picking apart the elements in the dream, you can begin to understand what's actually going on there. Okay, now, let's have some more pictures. Here we go. Right, okay. Now, so what is going on when we have a dream? First of all, there is the content, and that content then becomes mixed up. And then that content meets the sensor. Now, during the course of our ordinary life, the sensor is quite operative. So if we find, for example, a traffic warden has placed something on our car, we will say, hello, oh, sorry about that, but I just got delayed a few minutes. Would it be... We're polite, aren't we? We don't sort of start swearing at the traffic warden, because that would be bad policy. We inhibit our anger, our resentment, and we are polite on the surface. The sensor works well during the day, but during the night, the sensor doesn't work so well. And so our wishes come through, but they come through in a disguised form, in the same way in which if I wanted to plant a bomb inside Buckingham Palace, okay, I would go into Buckingham Palace, presumably in some kind of disguise, as a footman or a member of the Household Cavalry or something like that. I would be disguised in some way. And that is the way in which the content of the dream slips past the sensor. It slips past in disguise. That's how it works, okay? All right, now, in this business, Freud says not merely that a dream can be the fulfillment of the wish, he says that it must be. It always is. He's dogmatic about it, an absolute. It's always the fulfillment of the wish. Well, wait a moment, you might say. That doesn't quite work, does it? What about anxiety dreams? What about nightmares? What about dreams of falling, frustration, death, loss? How on earth can those be a kind of wish fulfillment? Freud has an ingenious answer to this. His answer, you remember, is that the dream is in disguise. And so he looks to see what lies behind it. He takes the example of a woman who goes out shopping and cannot buy the ingredients she needs for a dinner party that evening. This person was a client of Freud's and said, there you are, I'm having to forego my dinner party, you're wrong, which, by the way, was what a lot of Freud's clients said to him when he tried to interpret their dreams. He has an answer. By talking to the woman, he elicits the fact that at this party there was going to be a woman who this client regarded as a kind of love rival. Her husband has spoken very admiringly of this woman, but he's explained he's not so sexually attracted towards her because she's too thin. Now you can see how Freud's mind works here. He says, if the dinner party was held, the woman would be giving her love rival food and thereby fattening her up, which of course she doesn't want to do. So in the dream she is denied the opportunity to do that, and therefore her wish has been fulfilled. Now I bet a lot of you are very, very glad that you are not in a relationship with Sigmund Freud, because if there is an example of somebody not meeting you halfway, that's it. But he has a still further ingenious way of defending his theory. A patient said to him, look, I dreamt so-and-so, and Freud this time couldn't find a way of saying that that could be twisted into the film to the wish. So he says, I know what you're about. You were trying to prove me wrong. Your dream proves me wrong, and therefore the motive was it was the fulfillment of a wish. Okay? This is the way in which Freud was able to argue very, very convincingly. Now, so things are disguised, and sometimes things can be the exact opposite of what they are. That also enables him to claim that his theories are validated. You'll find later on that he mentions the idea that a table represents a woman. Why does a table represent a woman? And Freud says because it looks nothing like a woman. Because it's the exact opposite, and therefore it can be used to stand for it. Now, a serious part of this theory, of course, of this book, was the advancement for the first time of the theory of the Oedipus complex. This was a very, very important part of the book, the theory that what you want to do is to kill your father and marry your mother. I first came across this as a person in therapy myself when I was a young man. I'd gone to see a therapist for anxiety, and one Friday he ended the session by saying, and so you see, Richard, you wanted to kill your father and marry your mother. He then looked at his watch and said, but we have to stop now. I think Freudian analysis has come quite a way since then. But there is something in the theory, because I was walking with a friend of mine on the South Downs with her young son, and the young son said, Mummy, can I marry you? And my friend said, no, unfortunately not, because I'm already married to your father. And the young boy, who was about 6 at the time, said, oh, we can easily get rid of him. So you can see that there is some evidence to suggest that this may be the case. In fact, Sophocles, in his play on this, does refer to the idea that men in general do dream of having sex with their mothers, interestingly. Okay, another feature of the Freudian theory is that dreams almost always, not quite always, almost always have a sexual content. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that Freud says indicate the presence of this sexual content. But first of all, a few more pictures. Here we go. In Freud, by the way, a group of people usually means a secret. Okay, so here are the sexual symbols that Freud mentions. I'm not exaggerating, this is exactly what he says. The following things can represent sex. Steps, ladders, staircases, so you've come here, there, a sexual symbol. Going up or down stairs, so you may have gone through another sexual symbol there. Walls, so we are surrounded by sexual symbols. Let's see, what have we got here? Tables laid from a mill. Wood, because that's female material. A woman's hat, for certain, Freud says, is a sexual symbol. In fact, it suggests the genitals. An overcoat is the same. A necktie is the same, so any suspicions you might have had about Rees-Mogg are now completely realised. And also working any complicated machinery or apparatus, so you can see that I have here, I'm surrounded by sex. And in fact, this can also apply, by the way, to a piano, another symbol of sex. My piano teacher is not at the piano at the moment, but at least I can tell him that, in fact, when I don't do my piano practice, it's not because I had something against music, it's just I'm going through a period of sexual abstinence. Anyway, other symbols of sex, of castration, baldness, your hair thinning, the falling out of teeth, all these are sexual symbols, okay? Lizards are a symbol of warding off castration because they can regrow a tail. And fishes, snails, cats and mice, you might have wondered about mice, that's because their whiskers remind us of pubic hair. Now, this is in Freud, I'm not exaggerating it, okay? So those are some symbols. And so it's not surprising if you had that sort of view, how you can find sexual symbolism everywhere. If you just consider my trip here from Bexhill, first I get a ticket out of the machine by putting my credit card in it, then I go down a slope onto a platform, then I mount onto a train, then I travel on an embankment, then I go through a cutting, then I go through a tunnel, then I emerge at Bow Peak Junction, and finally I land up at Warrior Square. So you can see you could very easily read a lot of sexual symbolism into that. But to defend Freud here, I think you can see actually, in many cases, there can be an underlying sexual content to a lot of dreams, because we still live in a society that is still quite repressed, surprisingly suppressed, I think, in relation to sexuality. And so I think it probably is quite a fair comment, remaining true today, that dreams can have a kind of latent sexual content. Just finally, then, when I was at school, this is, by the way, how Freud deals with anxiety dreams. He says that anxiety dreams come from some kind of sexual frustration. And just a little bit of personal experience here. I'm just going to show you some more pictures very quickly before I go on. So, there we go. That one, by the way, is called The Great Masturbator by Dali. It's actually a picture of The Rock, but he also regarded it as a self-portrait. And the thing on the left there is a nose, and Dali is explicitly adopting Freudian symbolism here. A nose is a sexual symbol for Freud, and for Dali too. Okay, so that's quite interesting. And you can, that's another sexual symbol in the Freudian world and in Dali's world of symbols as well. And that obviously is a male sexual symbol. Teeth we've already dealt with, and then we're back there. So just lastly, my story. When I was in the sixth form, I suffered from a lot of anxiety. And this was a time when I had a great sexual desire for a fellow member of my history group. And obviously nothing ever happened about it. But I did suffer from a lot of anxiety. But whereas at the time I thought this anxiety was to do with exams and getting to university and all that sort of thing, in the Freudian view, it would be because my sexual impulses, my sexual desires were not being fulfilled. And just in that connection, something rather strange, and that is I developed a phobia, but my phobia was of power station chimneys. So there you go. I think it's quite possible there's more in this Freudian stuff than meets the eye. Okay? Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard. I've learned a huge amount, way more than I knew before I came in. I'm delighted with that. I found that fascinating. As I mentioned earlier, I had a trip to Harley Street earlier this week, and unfortunately things were okay, and I can still see. And I thought I was just exhausted as a result of the scans, but it turns out actually, I took a train to Harley Street and a train back, and clearly I was just totally and utterly sexually fucking exhausted by the end of my journey. So that's probably why I was so tired. Nothing to do with the consultant that I saw. So, but Richard, thank you so much. Now, the other thing to the Bavard Bar is that there's a chance to interact with our fantastic speakers. Richard is clearly very eminent and knowledgeable about all things Freudian, sexual, dream-related. So if you have any sexual, or dream-related questions, feel free to open up, or just dive into the talk. So any questions from anybody? I'm trying to sort of look to see. I'm sure there will be some. I know one or two of you are entirely sexually frustrated. So
or any questions about dreams, or any sort of dreams you've had which you don't, you're curious about the possible meanings.
Over there.
Yeah, I can't see any. There are. Yeah, far away. Just who?
Very, very rarely remember my dreams. So I very rarely remember my dreams and often wake up feeling I haven't dreamt at all. So what would Freud say about that? If it's not too incriminating.
I'm not sure about Freud, but the scientific evidence suggests that we all dream about 5 times a night, okay? And if we have a dream that is a nightmare or something of that sort, we wake up. If we have a pleasant dream, we don't. So that suggests that you probably have quite a pleasant dream, actually. And one way in which I would disagree with Freud, we do know that people who are generally anxious have anxiety dreams, and so the simplest explanation of that is not the Freudian one, actually, but just simply that our personalities continue into our sleeping life. Anxious people are anxious, less anxious people are not. So it could simply mean that you're relatively happy, and therefore your dreams don't wake you up. So that's a possibility. I mean, Freud might also say that maybe you do dream, but there's a process he calls secondary forgetting, and that you forget your dreams. So that's not very likely, I suspect, but it could be so. Is that right? Yeah? Okay.
Any other questions? It's better. I can see hands up. There's a question. I think I'll give you the mic.
Hello. I tend to find that I have dreams where I literally is exactly the same as my actual life. So I'll just dream I've got up, gone to work, and I've always wondered if that means that that's crazy or really stable.
I think that's a very good point, because I think that Freud has the idea that our sleep life is completely separate in some ways from our waking life. Obviously, the waking life comes into it and there's corresponds. But I personally think that dreams could represent the many possible activities of the mind, and it could be that you dream about what you're doing, in everyday life, in order to kind of process it, to remember it, to plan for it. There could be many things that we do when we're awake, we can do when we're asleep. It's known, for example, that in sleep we can sometimes find the solution to a problem. That's well known, well attested. Various composers, tunes have come to them at night. Buñuel, the film director, ideas for films would come to him when he was sleeping. So it'd be interesting to see what the relationship is between what your life is like during the day and whether there are any modifications to it at night.
There are slight modifications actually, but not very much, but that is interesting,
What are the modifications?
It'll be, I'm a hairdresser, so say like I'll go to work, but it won't be my regular clients, it'll be some people that I've seen on the telly or listened to on the radio or something.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's exactly the same. I literally get up, brush my teeth, go on my bike, go to work, go to the salon, but the modification perhaps is the people.
In a Freudian way, you could say that's wish fulfilled, that instead of just doing ordinary people, you wish you were actually a hairdresser to celebrities, if celebrities come up as your clients. But you could also wonder, I wonder what these particular celebrities represent. Maybe you had some associations with those celebrities, and that might be quite interesting to explore what those particular celebrities mean to you personally.
And the other one is just literally, I just go like I would on any Sunday night to my grandma's house, and it's exactly the same as I actually do on a Sunday night.
That's exactly the same. It's just an ordinary conversation.
I've done it. I just think I've got to do this again. I've done it.
Oh, you're awake now.
Which is that supposing in the course of the night we think to ourselves, we'd like to go to the toilet. And the theory is that we might do something analogous to going to the toilet in our dream as a way of preserving the sleep. So in other words, you go to the toilet in your dream, and that enables you to delay going to the toilet in fact. Okay? So it's the same sort of idea. It's almost like you're saying to yourself, I don't need to go to my grandmother's because I've already been. So I think that's, that could be.
That is really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe the same will apply to work.
Living the dream.
Sorry, another question. Someone says. Oh yeah.
It's a busy call. Yeah, I just want to know, so what's a deja vu?
Yes. Well, now, there is a kind of scientific explanation to this, because I don't understand, I don't know what it is. But it is that the brain does some kind of trick with you, whereby something that has, happened before, you're doing something for the first time, but you think you've done it before, because the brain's playing some kind of trick on you. But I'm afraid I don't quite know what the scientific explanation for that is. Just wondering, in connection with the last question, my mother once had an amazing experience. She got up, she sleepwalked. She got up in the night, went downstairs, did all the ironing, put it away, and went back to sleep. It was a feat she was never able to repeat again. So it was a particularly useful piece of sleepwalking. Any more?
Any more questions? Shall we take one more question if we have got anybody? All over here. This is where the sexual frustration comes in. I'm going to stay over here now. So who is that?
Hello, Richard. I just wanted to ask you. I'm meant to read that in your dream, pretty much everything you see, and I recently, from a psychology student, learned every person you see is somebody that you have met. You don't go into some sort of parallel universe of, obviously in a dream the laws of physics are suspended and so forth, but everyone you meet in a dream is somebody that you would have met even if it's just passing you in the street, everything, and therefore dreams are cultural, because if you were dreaming, if you were saying you were in an Amazonian rainforest person and you hadn't ever seen a car, you could never dream of a car, and therefore dreams are to a degree cultural. And he was talking about the dreams that happened at the time that he was around and in the culture that he was around, which would be different from dreams in other cultures where life was very different.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that Freud notes is that airships are beginning to come into dreams. And you can see why an airship could be a very, very potent symbol, can't you? That is something which is generally believed, that everybody in your dream is someone you've actually known. And this is also apparently true of those, do you ever create landscapes where you create cities and streets and so on? You think, I don't know how the wonderful imagination, because look at this place I've created. It is believed that actually you've seen that place at some point in your life. You're not really creating the place. But I agree with you that dreams are very, very largely cultural. But you've also got the Jungian view that we may share some deep symbols with people from other cultures, and that may be inscribed very deeply in our brains. So there is also a suggestion there may be something which is cross-cultural, which is basically human, and that sort of ties the whole of humanity together. So that's I rather like that.
Me too, because I'm constantly dreaming about Kate Middleton's sister, so clearly I know her, which is fantastic news. I just need to probably contact her and sort it all out. Right, fantastic. Richard, that was utterly brilliant. Thank you so much.